Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at Harvard's Institute of Politics. My name is Alex Levy. I'm a first year at the college planning on studying government and a member of the JFK Jr. Forum Committee. Before we begin, please note the two exit doors, one located on the JFK Street side and the Park side. In the event of an emergency, please walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also now take a moment to silence your cell phones. And join me in welcoming 2026 co-chairs of Harvard's European Conference, Slavina Ancheva and Carlo Giannone.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Alex, for the kind introduction. My name is Slavina Ancheva. I'm a second-year Master in Public Policy candidate at the Harvard Kennedy School and one of the co-chairs of this year's European Conference.
My name is Carlo Giannone, a second-year master student at the Harvard Kennedy School, the other co-chair of the European Conference. As you may have noticed, we firmly believe in the Roman Republic principle of shared leadership, two consul, one responsibility.
We're truly delighted to welcome you all here this evening. This 12th edition of the European Conference continues to build on the success of previous years. We're proud to be the biggest student-led conference on Europe in the United States, a place where analysis meets ambition and where proposals can travel from Cambridge to Washington to Brussels and across Europe.
Europe today is living a moment of profound uncertainty, a moment in which all the truths that we believed long-standing are shaking. But history teaches us that moments like this are never only crises. They are also opportunities. Opportunities to deepen unity, to catalyze sovereignty, and to lay foundation for growth.
And it is precisely in this context that we are honored to welcome His Excellency Luc Frieden, the Prime Minister of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. Throughout his career, Prime Minister Frieden has served as Minister of Justice, Minister of Finance, Minister of Defense, and several other leading private sector roles. He offers a unique perspective on European integration, economic governance, democratic resilience, and more. We are absolutely delighted to have him here this evening.
The conversation will be moderated by Daniel Ziblatt, Director of the Minda de Ginsburg Center of European Studies, Eaton Professor of Government at Harvard University, and author of the acclaimed books How Democracies Die and Tyranny of Minority. Thank you also to Aaron Goldman and the Institute of Politics for hosting us this evening.
Now, if you'll please join me in welcoming Prime Minister Luc Frieden to the stage.
Hello and good evening to all of you, and thank you for the warm welcome. It's great to be back. Now I ask you to picture this. A parent waves goodbye to their kids outside a public school they trust, knowing education is a right, not a privilege. A student takes a train to visit 10 countries in a single summer each, with a unique history, culture, architecture, experiencing the beauty and life lessons of diversity. All this without needing a passport or visa. A researcher arrives at a first-class university to collaborate with colleagues from all over the world, pursuing their research free from interference or prescription. This is not utopia, nor a distant dream or idealized vision. This is Europe on a normal Friday like today. And yet, Europe is often described, especially outside of Europe, as a continent in decline, stuck in history, struggling to adapt to a changing world order. Crisis is often the frame through which Europe is discussed, analyzed, and all too often dismissed. To that I say, come and see. It is not an argument, it is an invitation, a simple phrase. Come and see European societies that remain dynamic, without abandoning compassion and solidarity. Come and see European innovation that is ambitious, yet grounded in responsibility. Come and see European economies that pursue growth while respecting social and ecological limits. Because where others describe a continent in constant decline, I see continuous progress. Crisis has never been Europe's weakness. It has been an engine, a catalyst for change, for progress. Two successive world wars were human catastrophe, but also the start of this unique European peace project. The stagflation in the 1980s were an economic crisis, but also the start of the single market, a unified market of today, 450 million people. The currency upheavals in the 1990s were indeed a monetary crisis, but also the start of the euro, a new common currency for today, 21 European countries. The European project did not emerge and evolve because circumstances happened to be favorable. It did so because the alternative became unacceptable and the power of cooperation undeniable. We are now living through another period of historical significance, standing at yet another crossroads. Since at least the Marshall Plan, Europe has walked its path toward an ever closer union in an unwavering alliance with the United States. President John F. Kennedy once captured something essential about Europe's direction and the transatlantic relationship. He stated that, I quote, "The free nations of Europe are moving toward a unity of purpose and power and policy in every sphere of activity. We regard Europe as a welcome partner, not a rival." And speaking here today at the Kennedy School of Government, those words feel strikingly current. They remind us that Europe's strength has always come from choosing cooperation over fragmentation, shared purpose over short-term advantage, and responsibility over retreat. Today, we are faced with a structural rupture in that relationship. But where others see the end of Europe, I see it as our moment to seize. Each time Europe faced challenges, predictions of failure followed. And each time Europe adapted. We can do so again by sticking to the same values and principles that have guided us through the past periods of change: democracy, stability, freedom. In fact, the principles enshrined in the EU treaties and the UN Charter. Europe does not claim perfection. We discuss, we negotiate, we compromise. And yes, it can appear slow, for sure. But there is a reason for this approach. A political culture shaped by a collective memory, cautious of simplistic answers and mindful of its consequences. Since the end of the Second World War, stability for us in Europe has never meant the absence of discussions, but the ability to manage disagreement without violence, to transform difference into dialogue. Compromise is encouraged, not shunned. That is why the European Union may appear slower, but it is sturdier. It bends, but it does not break. Our democracies correct themselves because dissent is allowed. Come and see. In a world that is increasingly tempted by simplicity, Europe remains realistic. reality itself is complex. Honest solutions must be as well. Yes, we Europeans want technological progress, but it must serve humanity. Yes, we want economic growth, but it must respect planetary limits. Yes, we want security, but not at the expense of freedom, trust, and social cohesion. This constant negotiation between different objectives takes time, but it makes our decisions lasting and predictable. This is Europe's soft power in its truest sense. Not merely the influence of institutions or norms, but trust and credibility earned through a track record of transparent and common sense decisions, decisions that stick. And in a fragmented world, this soft power may be the most powerful of all. In this new world, power is too often measured in terms of dominance, success in speed, and progress in disruption. Europe measures power differently, not just by what wins, but by what holds. Partnerships for us have value. They are not just transactional relationships. Economies are steered to serve the long-term well-being of the population and planet. They are not left unchecked to pursue short-term financial gain. Come and see. We recognize that freedom too is complex. The freedom of speech, of religion, of political participation are principles. But in Europe we know that it is not that easy. These freedoms may be absolute for every individual, but within a society, they must be contingent on respecting the freedoms of those with whom we live. You may speak freely, but you cannot degrade another person's dignity. You may pray freely, but you cannot discriminate based on belief. You may vote freely, but you cannot otherwise seek to interfere in elections. The European understanding of freedom is rooted in history, a history that taught the cost of deliberate exclusion, the danger of silencing voices, and the consequences of unchecked power. Freedom of expression is protected because Europeans know from experience what happens when it disappears. But freedom of expression is not limitless either, because Europeans know from experience too what happens when you abuse that right to incite hatred based on race or religion. That is why I believe that education plays such an important role. In Europe, education is not only understood as training for employment, but as a preparation for citizenship, for coming of age, and for taking on responsibility. Come and see. These values and principles are the foundation on which Europe stands and on which we can build our future. And yet, like I said before, I do not claim that Europe is perfect the way it is. So what are the next steps we can, and I think we must, take in this moment of profound change? Where can we adapt without abandoning our European values? How do we take the next big step in European integration? I see three main areas: economy, energy, and defense. Our top priority must be our economic success, because it is the basis for our welfare, and it generates the wealth to deal with all other challenges. In Europe, the economy is not an end in itself. It is the condition that allows the European life to prosper. Growth built by healthy, educated, safe people is not only more humane, it is more durable. And the European Union has many economic strengths to offer. An integrated market of about 450 million people, with high purchasing power, a dense web of infrastructure, and top-class universities. And in this uncertain transition between two periods, where the rules of the old system no longer apply, but those of the new system have not yet taken shape, Europe has another strategic asset: its reliability, its predictability. You cannot put a number on it, but workers and businesses alike know its value. And yet, over the years, this predictability has also made us somewhat comfortable and risk-averse. This was not always the case. Most breakthrough innovations of the past centuries have been European. The steam engine, cars and jet engines, vaccines, X-rays and coronary bypasses, radio, TV, and the World Wide Web. Europeans dared, and Europeans succeeded. I want us to dare again, because I want us to succeed again. A changed risk culture can reunite the European growth engine. Research and innovation must be boosted through bold developments in new technologies like AI and quantum. The single market must be revived through a renewed spirit of entrepreneurship. The Savings and Investment Union, that is a unified European capital market, must finally become a reality through a different approach to investing, using European money to finance European success. The second European priority must be energy. This is the fundamental driver of economies, from fueling industrial factories and lighting up offices to enabling communication and powering data centers. And in an uncertain world, energy is a question of sovereignty. We cannot continue to rely on others for our energy supply. Our dependence on Russian gas became a strategic vulnerability, and we should avoid creating new ones. That is why we Europeans must expand our own energy production and build a truly European energy market, where power flows freely across borders. Solar panels in Portugal could power Luxembourg. Hydrogen from the North Sea could power Italy. And wind farms in Sweden could power Germany. Europe is attempting, imperfectly but deliberately, to align economic growth with environmental responsibility. That too is part of a distinctly European way of life. These choices reflect a sense of duty towards future generation, towards other regions of the world, and towards the planet itself. A third priority in this changed world must be to build up European defense capacity, not to intimidate our neighbors, but to deter potential aggressors. That is a sad reality when international law can no longer guarantee security. We will not abandon our support for international institutions, but we need to be able to back up our principles with a credible defense. Russia's unlawful and unacceptable invasion of Ukraine was a wake-up call for Europe in that sense. A lot of changes have been set in motion to improve readiness and interoperability. Difficult word, interoperability. But those efforts need more urgency and a new discussion of our strategic objective. A wide-ranging discussion about the future of NATO is inevitable. It is not about cutting off our bonds with the United States. It is about making a conscious choice on reducing our dependency and establishing a more balanced relationship. That is why Europe is taking over responsibility for its own continent, preferably within NATO. But we also need to reconsider the idea of a European army, not for the immediate future, but dismissing it out of hand would be a mistake too. The fact that it failed in the past should not be a reason for us not to try again. And even if it will not be possible in the short term to make one big jump, we can and must move forward step by step. I strongly believe that we can achieve all of this. Every day, people from around the world make a deliberate decision to study, to work, and to stay in Europe. They come because Europe holds an immense power of attraction. In Europe, you can raise your family in a safe environment and offer your children a high-quality education. In Europe, work is valued, but life is not postponed. In Europe, students and researchers are free to explore ideas without political interference, financial fear, or ideological constraint. Now, you may wonder, why does this matter here today at Harvard? Because we are in a new world where the rules are challenged. In this world, Europe, I believe, has something to offer. It is proof that a good life is possible and that cooperation can work, that multilateralism can work when it is anchored in law, institutions, and accountability. Europe's leadership in a changing world will not be defined by domination, but by demonstration, by showing that open societies can remain secure, that free markets can remain fair, and that political pluralism can remain peaceful. We choose again and again cooperation over isolation, law over force, dialogue over division, not because it is easy, but because it works, and because it is more durable for society as a whole in the long run. And we will work with anyone who is ready to engage on those terms, not from a position of moral superiority, but from a deep understanding of the consequences of our past moral failure. Because we saw where unchecked nationalism leads to, we know the power of cooperation. Because we saw the cost of division, we know the strength of unity. Because we saw the danger of silence, we know the value of dialogue. Crises do not only destroy, they reveal. They show what is essential, what endures, and what we are, and who we are. So to those who are skeptical about Europe's future, I offer an argument, but I offer not an argument, but an invitation. Come and see. Come and see European cities built for people, not cars. Come and see European energy networks being revamped from fossil fuels to renewable sources. Come and see European societies that invest not only in markets, but in meaning. The question is not whether Europe will endure. The question is what Europe can show the world. Come and see. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's really appropriate that we launch this Europe conference, the Prime Minister of Luxembourg. We have to remember that Luxembourg, along with Belgium and the Netherlands, started the Benelux Union, which was really the foundation of the European Union before the end of World War II. So I'm Daniel Ziblatt, and I'm really happy to be here to have an opportunity to engage in a conversation. We'll have a conversation for a few minutes, and then we'll open it up to the audience as well to ask questions. I just first want to say a word of congratulations to the student organizers for this conference. Really remarkable program, so thank you. So you've given us an invitation and an inspiring picture. But before we get to all of that, I just wanted to first ask a question, because I know you were a student here getting an LLM in the 1980s, I believe. And so my first question to you is, were you ever in the audience of this setting?
Yes. It's great to be back, because I have been here many times. I was at the law school, as you mentioned, but I took a cross-registration at this very school in a course called Political Leadership. And while I was very often sitting here listening to inspiring speeches, I never saw that I would one day come back here to be invited and to come back here to speak as Prime Minister of my country. So I know that some of you one day will also be standing here giving speeches, and I look forward to that day. So this school gave me a lot. This university, I owe a lot to this university. And so it's great to be back, and I think you are having the best part of your life probably by being here at this school. So enjoy every moment of it.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Yes, so I wanted to begin, I think maybe a good way to begin is to think about some of the challenges that Europe faces. And these, of course, implicate the transatlantic relationship as well. I mean, and I think in the current moment, it's very easy to focus on the external challenges facing Europe. So whether Russia, whether relations across the Atlantic. But maybe I thought an interesting place to begin would be to sort of think of the endogenous, or the challenges within Europe. Mm-hmm. So I'm somebody who's spent my career studying democracy. Democracies face challenges even within Europe. And so I was just wondering, how do you think about what are the major challenges from inside that you talked about some of these areas where adaptation is necessary. But let's say, the rise of populist parties, what's driving this? To the degree there is a domestic set of crises within Europe, where is this coming from?
Democracies, and indeed you wrote a great book about that, democracies are always vulnerable because they face different arguments, and those arguments are very important, because if you have just one view, if you silence other voices, that is very bad in the long term. But the argument must lead to a decision that everybody respects, and the decisions that we take must bring solutions to the challenges that people are facing. And our democracies can only survive if we answer the worries of the people. And what are these worries in Europe? That is that people keep their freedom, and that is being challenged from the outside. It is being challenged by migration trends, and that is exploited by some forces within the European Union and within our countries. We must make sure that prosperity remains high, and that social cohesion remains strong, so that there is not a gap that is too big between the rich and the poor, because the European strength has always been to have a strong middle class. So we must make sure that the welfare of that middle class continues to grow. If we deliver answers to those questions, create jobs, make sure that the cost of living does not become too difficult for people, that we find an answer to the housing problems that many people face in many European countries, then I think our democracies will survive. I strongly believe in the force of democracy, because we have seen, and I alluded to that in my remarks, what happens if democracy goes away. Our parents or grandparents rather lived through that when Nazi Germany invaded the rest of Europe. So democracy can quickly disappear. To get it back, you have to pay a very high price for it. So we need to fight for democracy, but democracy must also deliver a better life for people. Freedom, prosperity, these are the fundamental elements, and safety, these are the fundamental elements that will keep our democracies strong. And that is our duty as the leaders of our countries.
And so in your remarks, you hinted at or you discussed the self-correcting power of democracy. I mean, this is one of the great powers of democracy as opposed to non-democracies, is that political leaders like yourself get the signal from the voters when things are going well or when they're not going well. So
and from the political opposition. I mean, powers can never, I learned that in this very country. That's why I love this country. I hope only that the principles that we were taught from America will still continue to be applied everywhere, in Europe and elsewhere. Power cannot be unchecked. The checks and balances that are enshrined in the US Constitution and that we have in most European constitutions, they are essential. You know, power is not absolute. Power is there to take decisions, and we must take decisions. So we can not only argue, we must come to a point where decisions are being taken, but those decisions have to be within the limits of the law, international law, the Constitution, the national laws, and there must be constitutional courts, there must be Supreme Courts, whatever they are called, to check whether those who hold power comply with the fundamental principles enshrined in international treaties and the UN Charter above all, and our national constitution. And that, I think, is essential for our democracies to work.
So, and yet adaptations are necessary, as you say. And you pointed to three: the economy, energy, and security. It sounds as if you think that the driving source of dissatisfaction within democracies is often economic. I mean, if you had to elevate one issue that seems to be the most important issue that activates all of the other troubles, is it lack of prosperity or insufficient intergenerational upward mobility and so on? Is that where you would sort of put your main emphasis?
Yes and no. Yes, because I think people always look first to their own individual situation. They want to have a good life for themselves, for their kids. They want them to go to school, and they want them to have a better life than themselves. So I think that is a human thing, to make sure that you have enough to eat, that you have a house in which you can live a dignified life. And all that is Europe. You know, in Europe you go to school and school is free. It doesn't depend on your financial needs. We want people to have a retirement where they can live a dignified life with a pension that is, and that is a challenge in an aging society, that can be financed. So I think the economic success is extremely important. We need to create jobs, and we need to create jobs that do not make us too dependent on other parts of the world. But I think what is new is that security, defense, but in its broader sense, security has again become an issue for many Europeans. And that is new. When I grew up, you know, the Second World War was long gone. We were living in, and we are living in, the European Union, and that is the symbol of peace and stability. We never worried about war. I think 2014, with the invasion of Crimea by Russia, and even more 2022, with the invasion of the eastern part of Ukraine by Russia, changed that fundamentally. And so we realize that security can never be taken for granted. Peace cannot be taken for granted. And more recently, the fact that in this country, we have the feeling that Europe is considered differently, to put that mildly, also puts more burden on our shoulders, and we realize that we Europeans must become more independent from others. Invest more in our economy, invest more in our defense, invest more in our security, because defense and security is not today anymore just missiles flying over or tanks crossing the border. It's cybersecurity, it's drones, it's all kind of possible attacks. And I must say, last but not least, the respect for international law. We strongly believe as Europeans international law. Why? Because when law is not complied with, European countries do not know whom to trust. The laws are there to make the coexistence of powers possible. Therefore, you have treaties. That's why our ancestors created the United Nations. That's why they created the Bretton Woods institutions, IMF, World Bank. That's why we created NATO. Not we, but our parents and grandparents. I mean, these were great institutions. Let's keep them.
And so I want to dig into this last point a bit here. So in your comments, you said that Europe needs to build credible defense institutions. So I wanted to have a bit of a, let's dig into this a little bit. What's that mean exactly? I mean, there's, and are there different visions for how that ought to operate? Is there a debate happening? And so maybe you could give us a sense of, from Europe, what that debate looks like. So for example, nuclear capability. I mean, this is a big issue. To what degree is a shared nuclear capability within Europe something that you could envision? Are there different views on this? That's one. Let's take another area, just conventional military production. So having a defense industry, having a common defense industry where there's joint production in a sense. Is this something that you can see? Is this necessary? Are there different views on this? So let's be more specific on this last one. Yeah.
No, I think it starts with the point to say that we cannot rely on others to defend ourselves. I think that is the starting point. Europe is a superpower, like the US, like China, like Russia used to be. I think it's no longer today. But we are 450 million people. And if I include our immediate neighbors, the UK, Norway, we are even much bigger. So we need to realize that if we join forces, if we produce military equipment together, if we purchase military equipment together, if we produce it in Europe, purchase it in Europe, we become much more independent of others, and we are extremely strong, or we can be extremely strong. We didn't do so that much in the past because we were, first of all, we thought that peace was not an issue anymore. We could, we saw it for 80 years, so why should that change? And it changed suddenly. And we thought that America would always be there to protect Europe. Now that has not changed only under this administration, I have to say, because I remember well speeches under previous administrations, previous presidents who said that they think that their focus should be more on the Pacific region, and they withdraw US soldiers from Europe. So I think in all areas, conventional, probably also nuclear, but also in the new dimensions of security, we must pool forces. Again, if we do it 27 armies, one next to the other, that will never be efficient. It will be expensive, it will not be interoperable enough, and at the end of the day, it will not work. I think we made big progress over the past 2-3 years. I've now been Prime Minister for 2 years. Almost each and every European Council I attend, the meeting of heads of state and government, we talk about defense. We invest much more. Many of us were spending less than 2% of GDP on defense. Now we all reach 2%. We are continuing that path. But it's not enough spending money. It's to spend money efficiently and to make sure that together we are stronger. And then I think we will also be more respected by others because we invest in defense as a deterrence, not to invade others or to be a threat to others. That's certainly not the European way of doing things.
And are there different how much consensus would you say there is on this vision that you just laid out among your fellow European leaders?
Broad consensus. I think if the combined but disorganized efforts of Russia, China, and America achieved one thing, that is European unity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, why do you think that is, that it was, and I don't know how you'll feel to comment on this. I mean, why was it not, let's say, the tariff issue that sparked complete European consensus? Rather, was the Greenland issue. I mean, what is it about the Davos moment that was that sort of struck a chord, you think, among, I mean, you know, I haven't seen opinion polls on this, but my sense is that this seemed to strike much more of a chord, even than the tariff issue.
Because tariffs is about money. It's about trade relations. And by the way, we Europeans, we don't like tariffs. But the Greenland issue is about fundamental principles. You can't change borders by force. You can't change borders by threats. And therefore, what we Europeans believe in is international law, dialogue, diplomacy. We stand with Denmark for sure, because Denmark is a member of the European Union. It's an ally, it's a friend, and what could happen to Denmark could happen to any other country in Europe. And that is why we met in Europe. That is why we said to our American friends, this is not how we can deal with security or other issues. Let's sit at a table, let's discuss. In the same way, although the origins are different, that we say with regard to Ukraine, it is for Ukraine to decide its own future. Sovereignty and territorial integrity are fundamental principles we as Europeans strongly believe in, and we will never give up on those.
I want to turn to the third adaptation you talked about, which was energy. You laid out a very plausible and convincing scenario of how Portugal provides solar panel to the north.
They have more sun than we do.
Yes,
so
right, that's what I understand.
Come and see.
Yeah.
But
so what are the barriers? I mean, that sounds so plausible. Then I ask, why hasn't that happened? Or what are the barriers to it? Why is this so difficult? Or what do you see as the major barriers to implementing this kind of vision? And you know, it's begun. I mean, I want to recognize that this has begun.
the first challenge was that we needed to realize that, like in defense, what did we do? We bought gas from Russia and from Qatar. We bought oil from the Gulf states and from elsewhere. So now we realize that while we will continue to engage with our partners around the world, we also need to become less dependent on others. That was the first realization. The second one is that we want to protect the environment. So we need to have more renewable energy. We know that fossil fuels cannot be the future. And so it's this common approach of being less dependent and being more environmentally friendly that led us to do more in producing our own energy. Now to your question, the transportation of energy is a huge challenge. You know, to buy gas in the Middle East, you still need to transport it to Europe, you need to liquefy it, to bring it to a port in Antwerp or Rotterdam, and then transport it all over Europe. And the same is true for renewable energy. To bring this renewable energy from Portugal to Luxembourg, we need to have the connectivity between the grids, and that does not work as good as it should be. Because between Portugal and Luxembourg, there is one or two other countries. So, and they have an interest, maybe they have an interest in selling first their own energy. And that is, in the case of France, nuclear energy. So the question is how, and we must make sure that we now have a grid that is interconnecting all European countries. And then what I mentioned in my remarks will be possible. I think we are getting there. We all realize that we are stronger together, so we need to build those connections.
Do you think the threat of populism is something that could undermine both this as well as some of these other adaptations? So in other words, populism within each nation state, the rise of populist parties who might not be so happy about all of this cooperation and sharing across European borders.
The populists have simple answers to complex questions. And it is our duty of those who represent the parties of the political center to show that there are solutions to the questions of security, of prosperity, but we will only be safe and prosperous if we do things together. And then people need to feel that. So When I started in government, we decided to reduce taxes. We said we want people to have a better purchasing power. We introduced measures to build more houses, to produce more renewable energy. So people see the differences. And if we, and then what I say about my country is true for other European countries as well, if we can show that the European dream, the soft power of Europe, which I try to describe in my remarks, is there, then I think the populists will have, they will not succeed. They are powerful in some countries, but I think those who are in power now in those countries have to show that changes are possible through the political parties of the center, and we have to remind our public opinions what happened when extremist parties ruled over Europe. And I think the Second World War might be, for many, 80, 90 years ago, a long time ago, but history books are there to show what happens if we let those populist ideas win. I visited Auschwitz 2 years ago as Prime Minister when we commemorated the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And when you sit there, you think that all that was a consequence of human people, of Hitler, but not only of Hitler, but of many who followed him. And if you reread what happened in the 30s, I sometimes have the impression that what we see in a number of countries happening now, or what is being said now, reminds us what happened in the 30s. And we cannot let that happen. And that is why I think Europe can be a place which shows that a different path is possible.
Let me just add to that, part of, yes, I think that's, thank you. Part of the reason it's so important to have a conference like this, part of the reason it's so important that we have a center like the Center for European Studies that I direct here at Harvard is to teach about this, to learn about the history, about the contemporary politics, and to keep this kind of memory salient. Because I think one of the challenges that the US faces is that we've had such a long spell of constitutional stability that it's easy to take, just as you said, it's easy to take peace for granted, it's easy to take constitutional democracies for granted. And so unless one has an active memory of this, the success in a certain way makes a country vulnerable, makes countries vulnerable. So I think we're actually going to now open it up for questions. So there's microphones, there's 4 sets of microphones, so please line up if you have questions. And we'll open it up, the lights are in my eyes, but I think I'll be able to see folks up there. So please line up, and as you're lining up, I'll call on you. And as we're lining up, just one thing I'll say is where I do really agree with you in terms of the populist threat, is sometimes we forget this in this talk of crisis, is that in most democracies in Europe, around 60%, 70% of voters don't vote for populist parties. And there's a broad swath of a kind of from the center right to the center left of voters who don't vote for populists, and this is often majorities. And it's a matter of figuring out how those majorities govern and deliver for citizens, but there's some reason to be optimistic, I think, in that kind of figure. Okay, so we have some folks lined up. I'll start down here. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. I have a quick question about demography of Europe, because you mentioned rightly the number, the 450 million current number, is being a significant factor for stability and growth. All the projections for Europe widely accepted are negative in terms of demographic projection in the next few decades. As demography is destiny, you can't force people to recreate more in a democracy, but is there any discussion or these thoughts or your perspective on to create a condition for demographic stability, or am I called? Thank you.
Obviously, demography is a challenge for Europe. It has 2 dimensions. One is that the population is getting older in Europe, so there is a big challenge on how to finance the pension system in the medium and long term. That requires stronger economic growth. That's what I mentioned beforehand. So we need to put in place the conditions for creating jobs. And in addition, Europe will continue to need immigration. But immigration, of course, not that everybody just can come, but it must be an immigration that we control, that we organize. So legal immigration will be necessary to compensate for the demographic challenges that we are facing. That will not be an easy path to go, but I think we are moving into the right direction. So demography, yes, is a challenge. We also need to create an environment, including by tax measures, that are favorable for families, so that children are not considered to be a financial burden, but that they can go to school, that they have places to develop themselves. And so I believe that tax measures must also be family friendly, and that's what my government, for instance, in my country, is trying to do.
So we're going to go around, and these clever gentlemen realized there was nobody upstairs, so went upstairs who are next in line. So, and please, I meant to say, just very briefly say who you are and your affiliation, very briefly, but then go ahead.
Okay. So my name is Brando Benifei. I'm a member of European Parliament. So I had the chance to listen to Prime Minister Frieden, in fact, in the plenary of the Parliament. But I want to ask a very direct question. In the last weeks, we heard from Mario Draghi a very clear indication for the future of Europe that I personally share. It's the end of the time for the European Confederation, and rather we should think about becoming a federation, with a lot of good arguments that Draghi put on the table. And in fact, many things you said, with a lot of optimism that we are going there, that things are happening. To be frank, I have to say I'm a bit less optimist. I see a lot of stalemate, a lot of losing time by our European leaders, also looking at the last European Councils, also on the topics that we mentioned, energy, defense, etc. So I'm just asking, shouldn't we think also about changing the way Europe works? And I understand that there are these incentives for the smaller countries to accept to renounce to the veto power. So maybe we should think some solution, like some countries could do more together, and someone can decide, I want to stay in this further cooperation or not, but not impede, not stop these countries to do that, which happened in the past. Because this way, maybe, and I conclude my point and question, maybe we will not need to wait for some prime minister to go to the toilet to take decisions, because this also has happened, and this is, I mean, the symbol of the fact that this is a dysfunctional union as it works today. And I think we should think about it, and also to refer again about Draghi, the fiscal capacity. Draghi advocated more and more for more common investment with a borrowing capacity. Shouldn't we go on this? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. I was going to say, keep our questions brief, but thank you. Very good question. I know you've been associated with the kind of idea of multi-speed Europe, or I've seen reports on this, and it's a bit of this second part of this question. So, yeah, what do you think?
First of all, I'm more optimistic than you are, because I'm more optimistic about Europe than about many other places in the world. Because Europe stands for all the principles and ambitions that I mentioned in my remarks. And yes, we must move on. I don't believe in treaty changes because it takes too much time, because treaties, if we change a treaty, it has to be ratified by 27 parliaments. It takes too much time. And so I do share the way forward that you seem to mention in your question. That is that you have some kind of cooperation among those countries who are willing to move towards the next step of integration. And by the way, we did that. We did that with the Schengen area of free movement of people. Not all the member states are part of Schengen. We did it with the euro. I mentioned the euro is a shared common currency by 21 countries. Europe has 27. European Union has 27 member states. So yes, I think that is a way forward, and we have to identify the areas where that should happen. Competitiveness, creating jobs can be one of those areas. And by the way, I'm going to see with my colleagues, Prime Ministers Mario Draghi, next week in Belgium, somewhere in Belgium, near Liège, on an extraordinary meeting where we exactly discuss those issues of creating jobs in Europe. So I think that's a reasonable, pragmatic way of moving forward. It's always better to do things at 27. But we managed to do things also at less than 27. Not only Euro and Schengen, but also more recently. We discussed how to support Ukraine. We had a long discussion. At the end of the day, a month ago or so, we decided to give Ukraine a loan of 90 billion euros. Some countries were a little bit reluctant. They did not go to the toilet. They said, okay, if you want to do it, so we did it at 24, and it was Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Hungary who said, if you want to do it, just do it. So if we want to take decisions in the interest of all of us, we manage even with the current rules. But we must do it faster. I fully agree with you, and we will do so.
So multi-speed Europe without changing the treaties. I mean, what you're describing here. Very good.
And I would add something, because I don't know from which countries you are all coming from. I believe even in Europe of concentric circuits. So you have the core, which is always open to others. And I think to what happens in the world, those who are outside the European Union, but geographically close to the European Union, want to move again closer to us. That's the case of the UK, of Norway, of Iceland. And I see that, for instance, the coalition of the willing, i.e. the countries of Europe that are supporting, and not only Europe, who are supporting Ukraine, who are thinking about security guarantees. I also mentioned Canada in that context. I think it's very interesting to see Canada being a very strong partner of Europe, and that is something that we also should contemplate next to deepening the European Union.
Great. Thank you.
Prime Minister, my name is Yanis Korkovoulos and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. Firstly, thank you for making the case of why Europe, why we should be proud for being Europeans and why there is a vision, because I think sometimes Europeans were a bit too shy on that and we should, speak more about it. My question relates to the younger generation and politics. I think when we look at Europe, young people are civically active, but somehow institutionally distant, or they feel institutionally distant. So my question is, what do you think is a reform that governments or the European Commission or Parliament or the institutions can make to bring back the younger generation into feeling closer to institutions and politics in general? Thank you.
You never love institutions. I mean, institutions are boring, they are distant, but the policies those institutions take make us feeling Europe closer. Remember the beginning of my speech when I spoke about traveling through Europe without a passport. I think that's a great achievement. Erasmus, the exchange program of students, a great achievement. The absence of roaming fees, having the same phone subscription and with the same price whether you are in Paris or in Rome or elsewhere. These are major achievements where people see, wow, Europe works. And so we need to identify more of that, including the areas of energy, having a cross-border cooperation of companies. If you work in an SME in Europe and you want to do cross-border, sell your products across the border, that's still a little bit difficult. So making sure that it's getting easier to work cross-border and to see the benefits of Europe, then you don't need to love institutions, but you will love Europe.
Very good. Yes.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I actually grew up in the Saarland, a small German state bordering Luxembourg. So I'm very well aware that's like the political ego of a small state or a small country does not always correspond to its size. But my question directly relates to that. How do you make sure that the Luxembourgish voice on the European level is heard and that your vision you portrayed here is actually heard? Because I, as a young European or pro-European, I don't hear that vision from a German Chancellor Merz. I don't hear that vision from a French President Macron. I don't hear that optimism anymore. But 90% of what I hear from from European heads of government is from President Macron or Chancellor Merz.
First of all, there are no small and large countries. There are only countries. And while we sit at the European table, all arguments matter in the same way. And I think that is one of the important lessons of the setup of the European Union. When we discuss, there are 27 presidents or prime ministers sitting around the table, and we listen to each other, and we are moving forward together. And I can tell you, for speaking almost every week or so to President Macron and Chancellor Merz, they are very much aligned on moving forward on this European way. I will tell them that they should improve their communication, if that is the message you are telling me. But I have really the impression that, and we had a meeting even, I met with Chancellor Merz last week in Croatia. We discussed those issues, and we believe that we must make sure that Europe is competitive, that it's more independent, and that we are stronger together. Because even what you would call the larger countries, they are very small on the international scale. Each and every European country is rather small if you look at the world map. If I come back to the first question on demography, the European population in the world has become proportionally much smaller than it used to be. And that also requires us to be strong together, but also to work hard so that we can remain optimistic.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm postdoctoral fellow at Harvard Medical School. Although I was born in India, I was a PhD Marie Curie Fellow of European Commission in Europe. I studied there, and now I'm doing my postdoc in Harvard. So my question to you in terms of biosecurity, that's not that much we speak about in terms of international politics, although it's very important. So my quick question to you, vaccines and especially pandemic COVID has taught us that vaccines is not just limited to human health, it's a question about national, international security. So my question to you, what is your vision and Luxembourg's voice at the European level, where you are trying to integrate vaccines production and distribution at the foreign policy and at the national and European security?
That is a very good example of where we have seen in COVID, where we must also be less dependent on others. I mean, at the beginning of that, I wasn't in government then, I was in the private sector during those years, but European societies saw that they needed to import quite a number of vaccines, but drugs in general, from elsewhere in the world. And so I think the production of our own health system, of the drugs we need, we must become more independent of others. I would like to add to that I believe in a strategic autonomy of Europe, but it must always be an open autonomy. By that I say that there will always be elements that we need to acquire from elsewhere. So we can never be completely independent. We like to build bridges with others. We like to have open borders and markets. But on strategic items, including the ones you mentioned, we must become more independent. I think that's the lesson of COVID. And each crisis leads, you need to draw lessons from each crisis. Some we learned from the Second World War. Some we learned from the COVID crisis. Some we learned from the monetary crisis. And each time Europe draw lessons from that. And I think the quite historical geopolitical changes we are witnessing right now also require us again to draw lessons from that. And I really think that what I saw the last 12 months is that Europe changed considerably. We had so many meetings of head of state and government as we have never had before. We are meeting all the time in Brussels to discuss those issues. And that is new, so there's a real sense of unity. And I can tell you, I felt that probably in the most impressive manner 2 weeks ago when the Greenland crisis erupted. We were hours after some of these announcements were made, we were already meeting, we were sitting there, a very long evening in Brussels, and we felt extremely united. So something will come out of that, which is better for Europe and for the world, I believe.
So how do you balance, I mean, I just very quickly on this question, how do you, for a long period we thought interdependence, globalization breeds peace.
Yeah.
But then we've now learned that interdependence can be weaponized. And that dependencies create these vulnerabilities. So how can one remain committed to an open global economy, yet at the same time protect oneself against this kind of weaponization? Is it choosing certain sectors to be independent in, or how does one balance that?
First of all, education. That's why places like these are extremely important to show what happens if there is when force is stronger than the law. Secondly, we need to support multilateralism. I mean, going to the United Nations, I see a former prime minister in front of me here. We know about the strengths of multilateral organizations. When we meet in these places, you don't need to agree with everybody, but meeting at the United Nations, meeting in other international fora is extremely important. Education, diplomacy, also showing strength sometimes, and dialogue. I mean, we don't want, and I said that, we want to keep good relations and to strengthen the transatlantic relationship. Yes, we want to speak to other powers in the world, but not out of a position of inferiority, but looking eye to eye to them and to tell them what we believe in, and that is something that cannot be easily taken away.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. My name is Robin, I'm from the Netherlands, and I'm a graduate student at the Harvard School of Public Health. So my question is also healthcare related. I think we have a lot of strong health systems in Europe. At the same time, there's also a lot of room for collaboration, especially in new fields like digital health, women's health, brain health. And I'm just wondering what your view is on a European collaboration and what can be done to improve it. Thank you.
Health is also one of the things where I think that Europe is quite unique, because it does not depend on how much money you have to get the same medical treatment in most of, if not of all, European countries. So I think that differentiates Europe also from other places in the world. Now, I think what we need to do better is to make sure that we invest more money in research. I think, for instance, this country, and I visited a Harvard biotech lab this morning here, so I'm impressed by the research that has always been supported in the US, so I think Europe can learn from that. Then I believe that our universities in Europe need to collaborate more together, because again, if we pool our know-how together, I think the result can be better. But and in those areas also, I believe that we should work cross-border, not only within Europe, but also across the Atlantic. The same goes, by the way, for technology. I was on the west coast of the US a few months ago. I don't think we should cut off the bridges and the links between the US and Europe. But we as Europeans should develop more and then pool that together with what our American friends are doing. And health, I think, is a very good area where progress has brought tremendous positive aspects to humanity, and AI in health is another aspect where I think a lot of progress can be done, a lot of research needs to be done in Europe and elsewhere.
Thank you. So next up.
Hi, my name is Jules. I'm from Brussels, and I lived in Luxembourg last year.
Great.
Did a stage at the European Court of Justice. I'm doing an LLM currently. I just wanted to poke your brain about what your stance towards China should be in all of this, because in a certain sense, the story we heard today has been going on, has been shaped for a few years, but always with a particular focus on de-risking, as it's called, and especially towards Russia and China. And a sentiment I feel recently amongst lots of Europeans and young people is that, well, Russia is obviously doing horrible things and a great threat to Europe, but China, compared to the US, has never made threats to our territorial integrity. And without wanting to be naive to what they're doing or what would happen if China were to invade Taiwan, which would have huge ramifications for Europe, sometimes I kind of wonder why we are de-risking so much and so focused towards China, and a lot of language coming from Kallas is very bellicose, very negative. Whereas maybe we should be, as you said, more multilateral and engage more forward, because if we want to be more independent from the US, we also need to explore technological and economic cooperation with other countries, and China is just such a huge market and producer. So I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were on that, and if maybe we should reevaluate the de-risking project as it's been going on.
We must have a strong Europe that is not too dependent on other parts of the world. And what I said about Russia, what I said about the United States also is about China. Obviously, these three countries are completely different, so I do not consider them all the same. But the story for Europe is the same. We should not be too dependent on others. Now we share probably more common values with some parts rather than with other parts of the world. But if we Europeans develop our own strengths, economy, energy, security, all I mentioned in my remarks, without giving up our values and principles, which I consider also to be unique for the European continent, then I think we can talk with the Chinese. We need to realize that they become very ambitious in terms of technology, in terms of their military build-up, in terms of their economic ambition. So they evolved a lot over the past 20, 30 years, but we should also not cut off our ties with China. But again, we should not be naive. My realization over my long political career has been that sometimes we have been too naive. Time has come for us Europeans to be self-confident, to build on our own strengths, not to give our principles and values, and then deal on a fair manner with the rest of the world. And if they produce with unfair state aid some products and they want to send it all to Europe, like steel or other products, we should tell them, no, that's not possible. That's not how we work. If they build electric vehicles with unfair trade practices, we should tell them that's not how it works. But if they deal with us on the basis of fair trade practices, then they obviously we can work with them. So yes, I think de-risking is necessary, but we should never decouple from the rest of the world. I also add to that Europe depends on some of the rare earths that are outside of Europe, and that we cannot change because we cannot reinvent the soil on which we are living. So we will need to work with other parts of the world, and that's also and that's also okay. That's even good, because we don't want to isolate ourselves, but we want to be strong. We want to be a power that is recognized by others, including China.
So I think that's a very nice point to end on, perhaps, with a strong statement of both a positive vision as well as an articulation of a reason that strength is important as well. And so I think both of these seem to be the common themes. I know there was other people with questions, but we've run out of time. I just want to thank you, Prime Minister, for opening our session, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. If we can just take one more moment of your time to say a thank you, and then also give you a little bit of information about what's going to happen next. My name is Margot. I serve as the finance chair for the European Conference, and I'm a first year at the Kennedy School. I grew up here in the Boston area, and so it means a great deal to me to be able to welcome you to what is my hometown. The fact that so many people have come from across the United States and Europe to be with us here today is the testament to the fact that this area has long been a place where dialogue and exchange meet. I joined the European Conference because I wanted to play a part in keeping that tradition going. And witnessing this small group of highly motivated students bring people together shows that diplomacy does not only happen at the highest levels of government. The relationships formed here matter, and they last long after the conference ends. With that being said, I look forward to meeting more of you over the next couple of days. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank Prime Minister Frieden once again for joining us and for his leadership. Now we have two incredible panels coming up. We have one on Arctic security, and that'll be in Nye Auditorium. Another on energy security in Tauman G650. And welcome to Harvard. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.